Hello, everyone. It's John Forrester here. I'm with Meg Edwards and Julie Ireland. Hi, Meg and Julie.
Hi, you guys.
We're glad to see all of you here. We're looking forward to this webinar, the Trust Challenge, the Get Clear phase. This is the first of 3 webinars we've got set up, and you'll recognize right away that they're based on the 3 main sections of the weekly review: Get Clear, Get Current, Get Creative. And I'll spend just a moment here telling you how we kind of came to this. I was talking to Julie and Meg a couple of months ago about what takes somebody from being pretty good at GTD, where they're mostly trusting their system, to absolute trust in their system and everything just works. It's that point where they're not thinking about the system, it just works for them, so they don't have to, it's running without much maintenance other than just using it. And we talked about what are the things that people kind of hold on to as their last thing that they don't quite want to give up, where they say, I'm not sure GTD can handle that. And we talked about it as the things that people say, well, I can poke holes in methodology because it doesn't work for this. And we realized that the poke holes is really where somebody isn't quite willing to let go of that last little bit and say, okay, I'm going to commit to this and make it 100%. You know that saying about what 99% is, and 100% is a breeze. So that's how we got to this, is we said, what's going to take people to 100%? What are the things? And we began looking at examples that showed up in coaching. And every example we came up with came right back to one of the steps in the weekly review. So we said, let's just look at all this through the lens of the weekly review. Let's see what it takes to get to 100% through the lens of the weekly review. Now, this isn't specifically limited to the weekly review, but it makes such a great structure for looking at what those issues are that might be your last little thing to get you to 100% trust in your system. So that's the background on how we got to this series of 3 webinars. I want to turn it over to Julie to take it from there and say more about it.
Yeah, I'm not sure what else to say. You just did such a beautiful job. Like, while you were talking, I was like, wow, he's really good. John has such a great way of, I kind of come with all these ideas, like, John, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? And you have such a beautiful way of, like, kind of pulling it together in a much more articulate way that can be communicated clearly. But yeah, it really came out of that. A lot of the stuff, as I've shared with all of you, usually comes out of my own personal, awarenesses of where I have holes and gaps. So I put that, disclaimer out there. It's like, oh yeah, I was kind of paying attention to where I was holding back a little bit. What are the areas I'm holding back a little bit? And this is in service to all of your Connect members, all of our beloved Connect members, and for me, and shoring it up a little.
Yeah, I want to start off with an example because I actually had a call this morning with a client that I've been working with for quite some time. And he started off the call by saying that he was spinning his wheels and he was really overwhelmed and he didn't really know how to get on the other side of that. So my first question was, when's the last time you did a weekly review? And he goes, a while ago. And you almost could see, if he was a dog, he'd have, the tail in between his legs. He was just kind of like, oh, wow, I think maybe that's what it is. I said, great, let's do a weekly review. And, we caught so many gaps, not only that he wasn't fully set up with his system, but that when you don't do your weekly review on a regular basis, you're going to be spinning your wheels and you're going to be overwhelmed and you're not going to be able to trust it. And so I'm just going to really kind of cut to the chase because he was so great because he sent me an email right after it and he goes, Meg, thank you so much. The time we spent going through the weekly review helped me immensely. And at the end I said to him, do you feel like you're spinning your wheels? And he goes, no. And I said, do you feel overwhelmed? And I said, no. And I said, did you send any emails? Did you make any phone calls? Did you do anything on your next actions list? And he goes, no. I said, you reflected and through each one of these parts to be able then to get back in control. And so even though he knew that he benefited from doing the weekly review, he hadn't quite made it a habit. So because we're going to be doing these 3 webinars, we really wanted to slow this down. I know that there is the guided weekly review with Meg on GTD Connect that many of you might have taken. There's also one with David. But we really wanted to even take this slower in terms of having each one of you really take some more time looking at each one of these steps and where the gaps may be and where the drag may be, so that when you can alleviate that, your weekly reviews, I think, are going to go much, much more smoothly.
So I've got a question to ask everybody for the questions box. If on your GoToWebinar control panel, there's a questions box, a chat box, you can type things in. How many of you, when you do your weekly review, however often you do it, when you do it, are there some of these steps that you kind of go through the motions but don't really slow down and really dig in with it and do it more thoroughly? Is there anything in there on those steps where you'd say, I'm not quite at 100%, I'm ticking off the checkbox on that step, but I'm not really doing it? Anything like that ring a bell for any of you? If we're getting a couple of yeses, some emoticons that say that we're all in good company there. Yeah, Mark. Hey, Mark, good to see you. Review project lists. Rob is saying don't really take Minesweep all the way to next actions. So this is exactly the kind of stuff we're here to look at in this webinar and the 2 more, is to really slow down on each of those steps.
And John, I just want to make a comment on something that you shared, because I think I'm going to slow you down. I really appreciated what you're saying about, like,
Add some coffee. Maybe you'll need to slow me down.
Are we, like, I know I'm kind of quote unquote guilty of making it a little bit rote sometimes. Like I gotta get my weekly review done. Like, it's like I don't want to miss it, and then sometimes I can get a little, not necessarily being really purposeful at it. So I wanted to emphasize that. That's part of why we're doing this, to slow it down, to really, really, look at, being as focused as we can on all of these steps.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's why, Julie, I think a long time ago I stopped calling it my weekly review and I started calling it my weekly reflecting time, because I think that even the word review, sometimes it's like, yeah, I got to quickly review something. Mm-hmm. And I think that I remember when David wrote Making It All Work and he really started using the word reflecting for that 4th phase, I started also using that with clients and being able to say, this is really reflecting time. Mm-hmm. This is not a time to get caught up. This is not really a time for doing. You got to pick and choose the 2-minute rule during the weekly review. So yeah, I really hear you on sometimes about not getting rote and really making sure that I'm taking that step back. So in this weekly review and the structure, as many of you know, there are 3 parts to the weekly review. There's the Get Clear, the Get Current, and Get Creative part. And so we're going to be doing 3 different webinars, and this webinar today is on the Get Clear part. And the first thing that I really want to say is, I can't tell you how many people I know never get past the Get Clear part in the weekly review. They take this so literally that if they don't get clear, they can't move on to the Get Current part. So what we want to do is really kind of help you today really focus on this Get Clear part so that you actually can get through that to the rest of the weekly review.
Yeah, a couple of the folks in the questions box, the chat box, have said, I get stuck at Get Clear. There's so much input coming in during the week that I don't even get past the Get Clear stage to get to the rest of the reflection. So that's a good one to work on.
Because what happens during the week? John, you want to read this quote?
Sure. You will invariably take in more opportunities than your system can process on a daily basis. From a guy named David Allen.
I think that what is so great about having this quote here is that if people are not staying clear on a regular basis, then when they get to the weekly review, they're spending their whole weekly review getting clear instead of getting clear on a more regular basis. So I think that that's really what the big hiccup is with most people. So let's go ahead and move on to talk about the first of the 3 steps of Get Clear, which is the first one is to collect the loose papers and materials. So the first question that we want to ask you is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how effective are you with this step? So again, in the question box, if you could answer that, that would be really helpful so that we can really customize this conversation.
All right, we've got quite a range here. We started out, the first two responses were a 1 and a 10.
I love it.
We've got 3, 2, 9, 6, 6, 9, 7, 9, 6. 10, no problem. Good for you, Nigel. Yeah, we've got quite a range here.
So again, I have to tell you the story from this morning because I think it was such a hoot, because when I was taking him through this and I said, great, go ahead and collect your loose papers and materials, and about 30 seconds later he goes, yep, I'm good to go. And it wasn't until later. Now, I was working with him virtually and I didn't have the camera on, so I couldn't say, okay, pick up your camera and show me. I mean, I don't do that. But later on in the weekly review, he goes, well, I have all this paper on my desk. And I'm like, well, didn't you collect all of that and stick that in your inbox? And he goes, well, what inbox? I said, well, how about we get an inbox, because otherwise your whole desk is an inbox. And so he went away and he came back and he got an inbox, and I said, all right, now scoop up all that paper. He thought that having it on his desk made it all collected. So he scooped it all up, put it in his inbox, and then he picked up the first piece of paper to clarify. And he goes, well, I need to fill this out. And he goes, well, where do I put it? So one of the things I also feel like, that happens is just, do all of you have an inbox? I don't want to make any assumptions here. The other question that I'd like to ask is, how many of you actually also have backlog paper? Meaning, when you're doing the weekly review, are you collecting the current loose papers and going into your wallet and your briefcase and scooping up everything on your desk that's current and putting that in your inbox? Mm-hmm. But do any of you have questions about backlog paper?
Well, one person may here. Jackie, I noticed you said good on the collect except for the big office, which became a project. So would you consider that to be backlog? We've got some saying backlog email.
Well, yeah. I mean, we can get to that, because what happens in the next step when you get your ins to zero is how do you handle your backlog. So we'll get to that. But I think that what overwhelms people is that if you have backlog of paper, how do you handle this step? So one of the things that I say to people is, if you have backlog of paper, you really want to separate that first from your current. And then you want to be able to make a plan to be able to go through that backlog, or you can actually make that backlog a someday maybe. But, for really the intents and purposes for this part right here is, don't feel like you have to go collect all your backlog and put it in your in basket. I think we're really talking here about your current paper.
Mm-hmm. And Meg, when you say paper, are you talking about just paper or other physical items that might get tossed in an inbox, or maybe even be too big to be in an inbox, but there's a marker for it in the inbox?
Yeah, I think that, if you're particularly like your desk, you want to have what is reference equipment, decoration, and supplies on your desk. So if you're looking on this collection and you see something that maybe is broken and you can't put that in your in basket, you can certainly write a note that maybe your monitor is not working and put that in your in basket. Yeah. But basically it really is saying, it does say loose papers and materials. So anything that might have potential meaning to you, that might be potentially something that you need to capture, that you've got to clarify later, you want to go ahead and collect. And I really find, you guys, that this step only takes a couple of minutes.
But I also want to emphasize where I think sometimes we kind of, what I've seen with myself and clients, where people can kind of go numb a little bit to some of this stuff. It's like, I remember working with a client. We worked in a virtual. We didn't work in his office because he said, I don't have any paper. So it's like fine to work remotely. I think I might have told the story before, but we got there and he had this briefcase that, literally like the zipper was busting at the seams, because it was like business cards and paid Post-it notes and plane tickets and receipts, and it was like pachoink, and he was like, no, I don't have any paper. You know, and it was like, oh, that was a really great experience for me to see how, like, we sometimes think of paper as like, you know, physical mail or something like that, or, you know, a piece of paper, but there are other things constitute paper. So I'm always really like looking, you know, it's like, you know, or even it could even be simple as like, you know, someone was talking about meeting notes. Yeah, it's like meeting notes is another form of collection that, you know, needs to get processed and organized.
That briefcase reminds me of the exploding wallet scene from Seinfeld, where George has a wallet that is
Totally,
so
it was
packed that
like that. It was so like that. Yeah, it was like, oh my God, like that. Yeah,
okay.
the burrito, I think
Mhm.
they call it.
People are asking a lot about what does backlog mean. You get to really define what your backlog is, but it's really those things that may be actionable, or they may be things that you have attention on, but you're not necessarily going to maybe make them a next action. They may be going on your someday maybe list. So everybody's got a little bit of a different, I think it's very intuitive to know kind of, it's like your now and not now piles. And most people come, when they're learning the Getting Things Done methodology, they're coming with anywhere from 400 to 700 hours of backlog. And particularly if you're fairly new to getting things done, the weekly review can seem really overwhelming because you think, oh my gosh, if I collected every loose paper in the house, you know, it would take me hours and hours and hours. So in the beginning, you know, you just do your desk. Just collect what's on your desk and put that in your in basket. My client this morning, he had a lot of piles on his credenza, but we weren't collecting those right then and there. There also is a wonderful backlog webinar 1 and 2, that if any of you want some really best practices of how to handle backlog, I highly recommend that you watch or listen to those 2 webinars, because that will really give you wonderful tips and tricks about how to handle your backlog. So what we can do is move to then, what are your opportunities for improvement on getting clear? Where do you feel that you can, when you do your weekly review, that you just know what you need to collect? Some people like to customize their weekly review, so they may print out the weekly review and then write. That means I go into my briefcase, my wallet, my car. If you're traveling with an in folder that you need to collect from there. If you work out of your house, or if you're doing a personal weekly review and a professional weekly review, you know, do you need to kind of run around the house and collect those loose papers that might be in other rooms? And you can capture all of that so you don't have to rethink this step all the time. It's like, what do you need to collect or make sure that you collect so that you have no leaky systems here?
Like for me, like my handbag and my GTD note-taker wallet that I have with me, like sometimes I forget, like, you know, it's like all of a sudden I'll like, oh, that's right, I'll pull out my note-taker wallet and there's like, you know, 14 pieces of paper there. It's like, that's right, you know, it's like I have to have that on my checklist because sometimes I forget that I've collected stuff in there or captured.
So I'd love to hear in the question box, what are the opportunities for improvement? Because I bet what you share, other GTD Connect members might also benefit from hearing that as well.
Yeah, and actually, one person is asking, can you repeat the part about 400 to 700? Is that backlog, or is that work that you've already defined that's on your lists?
It's backlog. It's just including everything. David shared that with me. I remember when I first learned this methodology, and I was so relieved because I had just so much backlog of things that I wasn't going to make that backlog next actions. It really was so much of these things that were on my someday maybe list, or, you know, ideas that I may have.
And Meg, like all of the like beautiful, I feel like, you know, I have these like, you know, my favorite Meg quotes on my quote board, and, you know, all the beautiful mentoring that you've done with me over the years. And, you know, one of the things I always remember is you never sacrifice what's current for backlog. Like that stuck with me really, really profoundly, because it's like moving forward with like what's current, what's coming in, like I'm pristine about like, you know, capture, you know, clarify, organize, reflect. But sometimes if we start GTD with like a lot of like stuff that we haven't processed yet, we have to just draw a line in the sand between like, okay, I'm going to handle that at some point. Meanwhile, like what's current is, is really getting into empty, and then I'll, for me, I typically with clients will recommend making the backlog a project, because like it's not something they're going to do in one sitting.
Right.
But like drawing a line in the sand between like, what do I, what's really current, like my desk, like you were saying, Meg, or maybe it's like this week's worth of meeting notes versus like what's the stack over there that I just haven't dealt with.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I see with people, right? Julie and I go into somebody's office and we see meeting notes from that week. We also see meeting notes from 2 years ago that haven't been processed and organized. Or we see meeting notes from 6 months ago. That's backlog. We'll go into somebody's office and we'll look at their emails, and they'll have emails from that week, but they'll also have emails from July. Those July emails are backlog. They're not current. There might be some current actions in there, but they think that it's current. Or I'll see emails from 2013 and they think that that's current. I'm like, no, that's backlog. What you don't clarify today is tomorrow's backlog. I mean, that's coming from David. So the gentleman this morning, we took every email from 2 weeks ago and out. That was backlog, and we put him into a folder, and he went into his calendar to go ahead and schedule that. I know I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but you guys, you got to get really clear on how you define current. And I think people think that current is an email from 2013 or a meeting note from 2 months ago, and I don't know about you and Julie and John. I don't really consider that current. I really think that that is backlog, and you have to make a decision, but you cannot do that. You can't take a look at those things at the expense of staying clean and current with what you're currently doing.
And Meg, Tom has a question. Does paper include email? So, we'll get to that in just a second. We'll get to email. We're really talking about the physical paper at the moment.
And Sam's asking, how does backlog relate to reference material? Those are different. Sam, can you clarify what you're asking there? Or, unless Meg or Julie has heard that question before and wants to.
Yeah, I mean, if you already know, like sometimes when I work with clients, like they'll have like a stack of like 2 file, and they know that it's just reference, but they haven't set it up yet. So like to me, I just look at that like that's just another project. It's like get my filing current. Or filing system current. It's like there's no actions in there. They know that it's referenced, but it's not set up yet.
Great questions. Okay, do we want to go ahead and move on to the next step?
How about just one more here? My desk is full of reference material. Maybe it's time to pull out the REDS acronym. On your desk, Rob, unless it's, for me, I wouldn't have reference material on my desk. It would be filed in a filing cabinet. If it's on my desk, it's going to be something I'm using as support for a project I'm currently working on. If it's what I would call reference that I don't necessarily need at this moment, then it's going to go back in the filing cabinet and be filed away. If it's on my desk, it's reference that I'm currently using, or decoration or supplies. General reference that I'm not currently using wouldn't be on my desk. I don't know if that'll clarify that for you.
And I want to address Vishal's question because I think it's important. If my inbox is not cleared since yesterday, then you define it as backlog. Now, we wouldn't decline. Backlog really is. It's like it's from far enough ago that it's like, like I would consider what's in your inbox from yesterday completely current, or maybe like everything from like 2 weeks ago is current. Like you have to draw your own line in the sand, but certainly I wouldn't consider anything from like this week backlog. It's kind of like it's older stuff, in other words. I don't know. Do you guys want to? I want to make sure I'm being clear about that.
I think that's a good one, because every once in a while I'll come across somebody who is getting really close to inbox zero, but they've got 1 or 2 emails that are hanging out that are a month or 2 months old or a year old. I saw someone the other day who had a couple of emails from about a year ago, and this is someone who pretty much considers they're getting close enough to inbox zero. But for some reason, they've numbed out to that 1 or 2 that are a couple of months or a year old. And those are the ones where they look at them over and over. they don't want to put them somewhere because they haven't really decided what they mean, what those emails mean. So they have, in effect, if it were a physical inbox, they've taken the piece of paper out of the inbox, looked at it, and put it back on the bottom of the stack, and done that a lot of times. I think this is one of those steps where it's really good to slow down and say, what would it take to get to zero? What would it take for me to get that last one out that is 3 months old, and either move it into a backlog folder where it's a project to clear my backlog, or really just spend a couple of minutes thinking about what that email means so that I can get rid of it.
Yeah, I love that.
I'm going to give you guys an advanced tip because you're fabulous GTD Connect members. If your inbox is just really unruly and really more backlog, take it all out. Take it all out and make it backlog and start with the new in. And then put those things that you have just collected in your weekly review in your in so that you're starting with the current in if it's really all backlog. I can't tell you how many times I've come into a client's and their inbox is just so stale and so old, and they're really resisting putting anything new there. Just take it all out. And you know, that's backlog. And start with something new and fresh that you really are attracted to go in and clarify every 24 to 48 hours. But basically,
you can always triage it, right, Meg? You can always triage it if you're afraid to do that, just in case there's like some needle in the haystack in there.
Definitely. But the point of this step here, you guys, is you only want to take a couple of minutes. You know, this is really just, you know, you want to be getting clear during the week. This is kind of what have you maybe gone unconscious to, or what have you not, you know, what's gotten outside of your system, and you want to scoop it up and get it into your inbox, is really what this step is.
There was a lot of discussion on this step just about getting things into your inbox.
There was, because the next one is the get clear part, which is the second step to the get clear, which is getting your ins to zero. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, how effective do you feel like you are with this step? Meaning, during the weekly review, are you getting your ins to zero? Now, of course, we're going to have a big discussion about this because most people are coming into their weekly review with not just today's emails. You know, they're coming in with emails from you know, days or weeks or, you know, months or years ago. And this is what really trips people up. So we're really going to talk about some best practices. But for now, can you give us a sense of, on a scale of 1 to 10, how effective are you getting your ins to zero during the weekly review?
And again, we've got quite a range here. We've got a couple of our long-term GTDers who are saying 10, they're consistently getting into zero. A couple of folks are saying 1. I appreciate the honesty there, folks. 4, 6, 7, quite a range. Oh, here's one, 10 on physical and email, but sometimes an 8 in my OmniFocus.
John, I want to take a little liberty here, and I want to ask a couple of more questions if I can, because I think it will help people kind of understand this step in the weekly review. How many feel that if you can't get your ins to zero during the weekly review, you can't move on to the next step?
Good question.
Me. One person said me.
Me.
Yep. 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 Oh, good. We have one person that says doesn't feel that way. I do. I can't move on. Yes, I get stuck trying. Yep. Yep.
So generally, more people are saying, yeah, I get stuck at that and can't move on than are saying, not me. But there are a few that are saying, not me.
Okay. Let me ask another question. How many of you are spending about an hour to an hour and a half a day? Not in one sitting, 5 minutes here, 10 minutes here, 20 minutes here. How many of you are spending that hour to an hour and a half a day getting your ins to zero during the week? Not in your weekly review, but each day. How many of you are doing that?
That's a great question.
I wish I had the time. Yes, about 60 minutes. No, not me. 30 minutes. Not me. So again, we're getting kind of the never. Okay. So there's some of you that actually are doing it and some of you that aren't. So this is the issue.
Yeah.
When you're not getting to that hour to an hour and a half a day, you're going to come into that weekly review with hours to do this step. And the weekly review is not a time to get caught up of things that you didn't do during the week. And that's the big hiccup here. So, Julie, do you want to talk about some strategies on this stuff?
You know, I tend to kind of do like a self-assessment when I come into my weekly review. How much getting clear do I have to do? And if it's more than 30 minutes, I know I'm going to have to split it up. You know, I think, Meg, you might have been the one to teach me that. You know, it's like I just know my brain can handle about 20, 30 minutes of processing in the weekly review. Any more than that, it's going to either it'll take me too long or I'll just get too tired. You know, I won't have enough juice left to do the get current part. I love what you said earlier. It's like I have a plan. So either I will schedule time, like very purposefully to get caught up. You know, maybe it's the next couple of days so that I can move right into get current, which is a review. Sometimes I do the weekly review in reverse, and I don't want to get ahead of us, but sometimes it's like, you know what, I'll do the review part and then do the get clear part after, so that I'm in control of it. It's like I'm in control of my weekly review. It's not controlling me.
And I wanted to mention, I think it was Nigel who said that the processing, the clarifying, going through and getting to zero can be exhausting because it requires a lot of decision making. And that's different for each one of us, how exhausting it is. Personally, I find it very tiring to go through the process of making decisions about things like that. So by the time I get to zero, I can be really mentally tired. And it doesn't matter how much coffee I've had. I can just be that decision-making muscle in my brain, wherever that's located in here, just gets exhausted. So it's important for me not to wear out that way before I go into the next steps on the weekly review, because I'll be then going into the rest of the weekly review already tired, and I'm much more likely at that point to not give those steps full attention, to go through the motions rather than the substance of it.
Yeah, Julie, it's interesting. Julie was talking about, you know, no more than what did you say, 20 minutes or a half hour for this? You know,
that's all I can handle. That's all my brain can, you know.
Yeah, I'm even less than that. I'm about 15 minutes. Today's Thursday, and if I was doing my weekly review, I could get my ins to zero in 15 minutes. I don't have much paper, and my emails are already to zero. So, you know, I could get clear really kind of quickly. But there are times where I might be on the road, I might be traveling coaching, I may be out for 4 days, I come back, and getting my ins to zero, I'm like, wow, you know, I need an hour and a half, 2 hours. So the tip is you go into your calendar and you add, because remember, you got an hour and a half a day. So if I'm 2 hours behind, and tomorrow's Friday, I have 3.5 hours. I have the hour and a half for Friday, and I have another 2 hours. So the weekly review is an opportunity to recalibrate so that you don't go into the next weekly review 4 hours or 6 hours. And that's the tip here. That's really the trick, is you're reflecting and saying, where am I? And sometimes, you know, I only need 15 minutes, and sometimes I need a couple of hours, and everything in between. Mm-hmm. So I think that, and again, we're not talking about backlog. You know, we're just talking about getting your current into zero. Yeah. So, and
I think like people just, I guess, you know, for myself and the clients I work with, we do tend to have kind of an inaccurate representation of how much time that should take. So like people get very like rattled when we say 90 minutes a day, but you think if I'm really honest with myself, like I have my right eye on my physical inbox right now, and I would be embarrassed to show you. I bet you it will take me at least 45 minutes to process that stuff because I haven't been keeping up with it. So there's my self-disclosure. We have email and we have text messages, and now like I'm taking this class and the teacher is pushing everything through Facebook. Like I hardly ever look at Facebook, but now I have another inbox, and it's like being really honest with like where all these collection buckets are and how much time we need, and kind of just making that okay, like, and adjusting our schedules accordingly so that we don't end up at the end of the week with like, oh my God, like, you know, Julie Iron's inbox.
We're getting lots of folks writing in the questions chat box saying light bulb going off. That's it. We've nailed it. So I hope this is really helpful, and if any of you out there were having that feeling of decision fatigue, and that was part of what the trouble is with getting into Xero, either decision fatigue or not really setting aside enough time to do the clarifying step. I hope this has been helpful. It looks like it is. We're getting lots of people saying, "Oh wow, yes, thanks, that's it." Okay.
I can't see the camera, you guys, so let me know. John's asking me, do I have much paper? So tell me, can you see this? Because I can't see the camera because I'm doing the slides. This is just one day of paper. This is just client. This is just one day of paper, and this is what makes it about an hour and a half a day for me and my emails. But when I stay on top of it, John, sometimes it doesn't take me that much. It doesn't take me that long to process and organize my paper. That's what I meant. But I still, after all these years, I'm like, how did that all happen? How did I get this much within 24 hours?
Mm-hmm. And Gwen has a great question. She has a great, I love this question. Here's the work stuff, and then there's the home stuff. We're talking 1 to 1.5 hour total in both locales. So, like, that's a great question. Like, yeah, I mean, for most people, it's like they might need 90 minutes, at the office, and they might need another 30 to 60 minutes for their stuff at home. So it's factoring that in too. I think a lot of clients, they get home and they might have an inbox, but it's like, like that, I think, is what people tend to save up as like, oh, I'll just process it once a week, and then it becomes like kind of a bit of a mountain. So it's like, what kind of strategies do we need to kind of stay more on top of it day to day, so that it's not this big, ugly, scary monster.
Yeah. And for those of you who are saying, I just don't have time, there's too much work that's showing up for me to take time to spend 90 minutes a day clarifying and getting into Xero, all I can say is I think this might transform your world if you somehow headed more toward 90 minutes or whatever your number is to get ins to Xero. All I can say is people who do consistently get ins to Xero, it's like looking through a whole different lens, it's transformative. It makes everything else seem easier and take less time.
Before we get into what are your opportunities for improvement, where this gets into, you guys, is the threefold nature of work. Because when Julie and I are doing weekly reviews with people, if people are still struggling with the threefold nature of work, they're going to struggle and have challenges with the weekly review. And the threefold nature of work, again, is part of your day is doing defined work, part of your day is defining your work, which we're talking about that hour to an hour and a half a day, and part of your day is dealing with the unplanned. If your calendar is back-to-back meetings, you're not going to get to that doing and defining, and then you're going to get bottleneck on the weekly review. And this is why we are breaking this up into 3 webinars for you to understand where the breakdown is in your GTD practice that influences the weekly review. And they really go hand in hand. But what I want to say to everybody is people think that they have to be fully set up before they can do the weekly review, and it's actually the opposite. I recommend that you only in the beginning, if you're not really up and running on the weekly review, to not schedule more than an hour or an hour and a half and get through all of the steps. And as you do, your practice will get better during the week. And it may take some time, and that's why we're doing these, I think, right, isn't the second one in November and the third one in December?
Yes.
So really giving you guys these 3 months to not only work on the weekly review, but work on your GTD systems in between it as well.
Great.
So,
and that also ties in with what Carol's saying. Hi, Carol. Always good to see you. That it's easier to clarify and get into Xero if you have buckets set up for organizing into. That's really important. If you don't have places that make sense for you to organize into, then it'll keep making sense to keep stuff in your inbox. If you've got a great place to put it that you can trust to organize into, then it's easier to get it out of the inbox.
That's really powerful. I just had a client yesterday where the reason her desk was an inbox is because her reference wasn't set up, so there were no placeholders for things, and she couldn't clarify because there was no organize.
Yeah, people are also asking about this. When do you squeeze in that home processing? I find that work for me, I have got to get my Insta0 within 24 hours, particularly because we have a best practice of getting back to people within 24 hours. If I can't, I'm going to let people know that. Home, I have stuff that can wait until the weekend, or, I sometimes only have to do it a couple of times a week and I don't miss anything. My daughters, I have to process and organize whatever my daughter brings home because there's usually a very quick turnaround with that. But sometimes the other things can kind of wait. So really, you all have to kind of really figure out how often do I have to get my Insta0 to manage my agreements and my commitments with myself that involve other people.
Yeah.
Is really the question. You always want to ask the best practice. Really, if you understand the best practice, then this is where you can kind of customize it for yourself. So can we move to what are your opportunities for improvement given this conversation? And if you could put that in the question box, John will read it, and people, again, can learn from what other people are working on for improvement.
Managing kids' inputs, huge. Meg, I bet you can relate to that. Meg has a daughter who's a senior and working on college applications and stuff like that.
Yeah, I cannot miss processing and organizing what she brings home every day because it's just flying in the door and I have to handle it and I can't wait. Where when she was younger, I could wait several days sometimes.
Mm-hmm. And Rob is saying opportunity for improvement, revisit the threefold nature of work and put it on my calendar. Rob, I think that might be really helpful based on what you've been asking today. That might be really helpful to get clearer on how much of your time you think you need to spend in each of those three areas. Because you may be doing it really well, and it could be that your opportunity for improvement is just to lighten up with yourself some, and maybe there is some change to make. Oh, Mark's saying I have this odd aversion to processing my physical inbox at home. Mark, my wife would say that I have the same thing. My physical inbox at home does tend to collect more and not get processed as often, but I'm okay with that because I know that the kinds of things that go into that don't require a faster response. I can process my physical inbox at home once a week, and it's good enough. The stuff that goes in there does need a timely response, like bills to be paid, but they don't have to be paid sooner than the next time I process the inbox within 1 week. So maybe that's just the nature of home inboxes for some of us. Improving my reference system, that's Vishal saying that. More time for daily clarity. Nigel, great. Jody, allow time to process home inputs twice a week, separate from weekly review time. Good. So we're getting lots of people with some opportunities for improvement that way.
Fabulous. All right, so let's move on to the last part of the Get Clear, which is to empty your head. And on a scale of 1 to 10, how effective do you feel like you are with this step? Not only with the weekly review, but let's go ahead and open it up to how good are you when you have that thought that you go ahead and capture it? Sometimes you don't capture it the first time, but how are you guys with getting clear? As David said, your mind is for having ideas, not holding them.
And we've got 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 9 to 10. Occasionally toss a couple of critical home stuff into my red file and drag it to the office. A way to trick myself. Mark, any tricks that work are good. Looks most people are either middle to higher range on this one. I'm not seeing anybody down at 1 or 2. People are pretty good about emptying their head.
And I have an invitation here because I know for me I'm pretty good about that. I think of something, I write it down. So I guess my invitation is to maybe go a little deeper with that. So I think Meg and I, we talked about this years ago. And it's like when I ask myself these questions, like what am I avoiding? what am I resisting? Like those, I think, Meg, I think you taught me that. Like those are my great empty my head mind sweep questions as part of my weekly review, because it allows me to go a little deeper instead of just like, I forgot to, make the appointment to get the oil changed on my car. It's like, no, what have I been avoiding this week? It's like slowing it down, like slowing the mind sweep down to really like, what's been floating around, that I have been resistant to capturing.
Yep.
I think a Connect member says something that I think is really spot on. It says, I'm usually too tired by the previous steps. Coming up with more ideas just restarts the processing loop, and then it feels like the review will never end. Sometimes I say tongue-in-cheek that this is not necessarily the time to collect every thought you've had since you were born. That you really, those of you who have known me, have been around, have heard this, but I am like Julie. At this stage, I'm really pretty much strategic, because I'm pretty good, and it sounds like most of the Connect members, this is actually where you were the highest, given the other two steps. So you're really getting the value of capturing. And so a story is, I was working with a woman, 3 children, very high-powered position. I said, do you have anything on your mind? And she's like, no. I was like, really? I said, is this going to be the first client ever that I've never had to do a mind sweep with? I said, boy, that's kind of interesting. And then I said, well, but is there anything that's waking you up in the middle of the night? And she's just like, well, of course. And then she just started capturing all these things on paper. And when she was done with that, and I said, well, but are you procrastinating at anything? And she's like, well, of course. And then she just wrote down a whole slew of other things. And I kept asking those questions, and it wasn't like giving her those personal and professional trigger lists that are in the Getting Things Done book, and I think that they're on GTD Connect as well. That didn't work for her when I did that. It really was asking those key questions. And so even after all these years, I just kind of take a deep breath and I just say, Meg, what are you not capturing that you really need to capture? And maybe it's already on a list that still has my attention that I need to take a deeper dive on. What have I gone unconscious to that I don't want to be conscious to? It's really, at some point, it's really like, okay, now what really, really has my attention? Now,
and you're just capturing it.
I'm just capturing.
You're not making a commitment to that. I think that's why people avoid the mind sweep, because they're so afraid they're going to like unleash Pandora's box, and like, it's like, that's okay. Like all of that could be someday maybe, but it's not going to serve you keeping it in your head at all.
So then what happens is people say, well, then what do I do with it? I just collected 10 more things. Well, you could put it into your in basket, but hopefully your in basket, your paper-based in basket, is already emptied. But if it's not, my kind of recommendation is try to process and organize it right then and there. Because, the step before is to get your ins to 0. So this is where I've seen it happen a lot of different ways. And I've also seen people just skip over this step. They rather kind of go through the current part and then say at the very end of the weekly review, is there anything still on my mind? The thing that I think people miss here is David did not number these. He didn't go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. They're not numbered. David just found that it was really, it made more sense to get clear before you got current. But don't think that you can't do this step at another time, or just even pull it outside of the weekly review, because I really have quite a few clients that this step just doesn't belong here for them, and it really, really is okay to do it at the end or do it some other time. But please know that you don't want to be repelled by this step. So I think that's why we really wanted to share about kind of how we also individually do this. I don't take out the trigger list every weekly review, but sometimes I do. So.
Well, one of the ways I approach it too is the trigger list can be very it's not very emotional for me sometimes. So I'll ask questions from an emotional perspective, because generally I'm not the most emotional guy. It's taken me years to get more comfy with my feelings and be Californian. But one of the things that helps me a lot is when I look at Mindsweep and say, what is there that I don't feel good about? It's different to look at the car and say, does anything need to be maintained on the car? That's pretty cold and unemotional and objective. But if I say, how do I feel when I'm approaching the car, opening the door, getting in to drive the car? Oh, I don't feel so great. It hasn't been vacuumed in a while. There's a Minesweep item. But I wouldn't necessarily get that if I approached it without asking, how do I feel? Or is there anything I don't feel great about? When I open the closet, is there anything in the closet where I look and go, I don't feel good about that shirt. I just never pick that shirt to wear. That becomes a Minesweep item. So ask yourself those kind of questions if you find that you get to the end of Minesweep and go, nothing really showed up. And nothing may still show up, but at least you've kind of taken a deeper cut at it that way. I've got a couple of people asking about, at the end of this get clear and empty your head, then what happens? Still not clear on what process means or what do I do with all these things. So, Meg and Julie.
Sure. You got some choices here. You either can then process and organize it into your system, or you can put it in your inbox to do later. But again, you want to have your ins to zero when you do your weekly review. So I've seen it done both ways. But when you empty your head, you have to, as soon as you can, process and organize it. So given our time frame, can we move to what are your opportunities for improvement?
I want to check in on one question here. Let me look back here and grab one other one here. The same things appear on my Minesweep over and over again, maybe because I'm not processing them fully. That's Jody asking that. So what do you have to say when the same thing shows up more than once on a Minesweep?
Let's say that, I'm just trying to come up with an example. Let's say that I have to make a airline ticket. I got to make a plane ticket to New York for coaching. And it's been on my mind, and it's been on my mind, and it's been on my mind. Sometimes I have to revisit if it's a project, I have to revisit the outcome of a project, and sometimes I have to revisit the next action. Maybe the reason why I haven't done the next action is because I want to call a cousin to see if they're going to be around, and if not, maybe I won't take that trip. I mean, you have to kind of do a little bit more thinking about what do you need to do to get that off of your mind? What do I need to do getting that New York trip off of my mind? That's what I always ask myself, and I can always walk myself and clients through that. It just needs some more thinking.
Yeah, sometimes there's just something else that's like in the way of that, like that loop getting closed. And so, like if you poke around a little, I love that example. It's like, yeah, maybe I feel like I should call my cousin, but I haven't talked to them in a while. Now I feel weird. I'm in New York, and so kind of sometimes like work it through.
Good. Yeah, one thing I can say for sure is if it does keep coming up in my Minesweep, there's something else that I need to do about it. It's not that my mind is broken or wrong to bring that one up over and over again. There's something else there.
Yeah, like what does this mean to me? What do I really need to do with this next?
Yeah.
And get really granular about that.
Okay, Meg, you were ready to move on.
No, great question. Thank you, John. So we just want to ask yourself to reflect about what are your opportunities for improvement on this step. One person said, I'm going to do this at the end of the weekly review. That's one way of improving.
I just want to say, it can be helpful if you think while you are all thinking of these great improvement, opportunities to really capture them. It's just so funny, but my weekly review checklist, I have a sticky note with my my trigger questions. I just slap it right on here so that I don't. Someone said children's health issues. That might be something I want to ask myself as part of my empty my head. So make sure you have that captured so you don't have to try to remember those questions.
Great. Okay. So what we want to finish up with is asking yourself, so what can you commit to do over the next month to improve your practice around the Get Clear steps so that you can have greater trust in your system? So even though we asked you on each one of these steps, collecting your loose papers, getting your ins to zero, and doing a Minesweep, and you all kind of grabbed some things that you need to, where there's opportunities to improve on, next month's webinar is going to be on the Get Current part. So what can you do to improve that when you're doing your weekly reviews between now and the next webinar, that you can more elegantly get through the get clear part so you actually can get to the get current part, which is really the heart of the weekly review.
Mm-hmm.
And once you do that, we'd love for you to be able to kind of share in the question box.
We've got Terry is going to print out the threefold nature of work and refer to that during his daily activities to see if he can get more of a handle on how he's spending time within the threefold nature of work. Take 60 to 90 minutes per day for processing inboxes. Great. Get emails to 0 daily. Great commitment. Start triaging my backlog in the physical inbox. Smart. Actually doing the weekly review. Good. I hope this has been inspiring for that too. Create the habit of clearing my ins regularly. Yeah. Split the get clear from the rest of the review so I have enough energy for the rest of the process. Ruth, that's smart. I like that approach.
That's what I do. After all these years, I get clear the day before I get current on my weekly review.
It seems like lots of folks are coming up with very practical next steps they can take in the next few weeks. And we sure hope to see all of you on our next webinar for the next section of this.
So I just want to finish up, we got a minute left, by saying what are your biggest takeaways from today? I mean, I think that, is there anything else that anybody would like to share in terms of your takeaways in the last remaining minute here? One person says, my improvement plan for weekly review is to set dates in my diary for doing them. Fabulous. Threefold nature of work.
Not having the steps in order.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great.
And one person is saying, it was like a kick in my A ... Good. I hope it was a friendly one, a supportive kick in the A ...
All right, John. Well, there we go.
Well, Julie and Meg, thanks for being here, and all you GTD Connect members, thanks for joining us with this. We hope it's been valuable, and we're looking forward to the next webinar in this series.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Julie and
Ciao,
John.
everyone. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Ciao.